I think this is a good time to kick this off. Thanks everybody for being here on this beautiful summer day, this early summer day that we're having. I know I want to run out into the world and get my vitamin D, but we'll have a discussion about Passive House. So we had a really high volume of people signing up, so there's a real excitement around this, and I'm excited that we're here for Passive House 101, Pushing the Building Envelope. This conversation is an exploration of the ideas that we were talking about in the Passive House Guide in the spring issue of Upstate House. And first, I guess I want to give a couple of shout outs here. One to Jeff Eckes, who kind of was the spark that lit the fire. So Jeff, thanks for that. That was, you and I had a couple of early conversations about Passive House, and I went to the Passive House happy hour, and that was amazing. And I learned more about Passive House than I was expecting. And now I'm a real convert on this. Everyone on the call, by the way, I can't stop talking about Passive House now that I know a lot about it. And I also want to give a shout out to Passive House Alliance of the Hudson Valley. All you guys were very helpful in putting the content together. John Lorcher especially, thank you for kind of organizing it on that end. And I was so pleased to put together this primer for our readers to really get them more involved in this, transformational building technology. So, I mean, I'm really excited that we're here. Just a heads up, I got my first dose of Moderna today. So if I seem strange or I fall out of my chair, you'll know why. Just carry on by yourselves. I didn't know there were advantages to being 50 other than, getting the AARP material, but, now I could get my vaccine as well. So just a few housekeeping notes. Let's see. Oh, keep yourself on mute. Yep, that's good. I mentioned that one. After these remarks, we're going to hear from a couple of our sponsors, and then we'll get into the panel introductions and the questions. And I guess, the other thing I'm going to say is, we all know the Zoom thing, but this call is being recorded. I want to say that, and we will be posting this recording on Upstate House within the next week. So if you are in the witness protection program, have unpaid gambling debts, now might be the time to do something about getting off the call or changing your name and your photograph. Okay. Department of Shameless Self-Promotion. The April issue of Chronogram is on stands any second now. And while I may be a bit biased, I think it's a pretty good issue. It has an article called "Has COVID Killed Sex?" An investigation of what the pandemic has done to our sex lives. And so we teased out that the other day in an email saying, you might want to buy this issue, and we had a headline, "Has COVID Killed Sex?" I got one guy who emailed me back with a one-word answer, no. So FYI, COVID has not killed sex for some. But you can subscribe to the magazine. You can subscribe to Chronogram. You can subscribe to Upstate House via the handy-dandy link that my colleague Sam will be posting in the chat. It is a great way to support the work that we do directly, and also have the magazines delivered directly to your home, P.O. box, etc. And all right, we better start the program. So I want to introduce our first mic moment. Jessica Tobin from Associa, are you with us? Jessica. Going once, going twice. We're going to come back around to Jessica, but I do see John Messerschmidt is here. John, how are you?
Hi, pretty good. I'm good.
You want to talk to us a little bit about what you do at Hudson Valley Native Landscaping?
Sure. We design and install native gardens, and we restore woodlands around throughout the entire Hudson Valley. We have a very creative team of people who are very passionate about the natural environment and restoring it to health and beauty. Native gardens fit very well with the Passive House concept. Most landscape designers choose plants with little consideration for how those plants interact with pollinators and birds. If they want to attract hummingbirds, they put out a hummingbird feeder. Well, we plant flowers that hummingbirds love, and we choose plants that will contribute to the ecology of a yard, and are also beautiful for people to enjoy as well. So it's a win-win situation. We all live in nature and are a part of nature, whether we are aware of it or not. And we are aware of it, and we plan for it, not just for your gardens, but for your surrounding property as well. And we call this philosophy enlightened landscaping. And that's it. That's what I have.
I mean, John, you and I have spoken in the past, and what you do, enlightened landscaping, certainly seems like an amazing fit to go along with the enlightened building practices of Passive House. So thanks for that.
Yes, we believe so. All right. Good to be part of it.
So Jessica Tobin, are you out there?
Diane Feinstein, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
How wonderful. You? Hello. Jessica is down at one of our main offices. My name's Diane Feinstein, and I am the president of Associa New York. First of all, we certainly support energy-efficient residential structures, which are healthy, affordable, and ecological. I'm aware of them because they do exist in Western Europe. Associa is based in the Hudson Valley, and we provide property management services at various levels for 30 communities throughout the valley that have, recreational facilities or not. The community managers are very proactive and have years of experience in the property management field. So whether you have a co-op, a condo, or a homeowners association, and hopefully they're going to be built in future to be energy efficient, but we assist the board members with annual budgeting, handling all the financial responsibilities of the communities. We assist with capital improvement projects, handle emergency and regular day-to-day maintenance problems. Basically, we're available 24/7 for your needs as a community. So if you're seeking a professional property management company, please contact me at 845-330-2221. And I wish you all the very best.
Thanks, Diane.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get down to it. We can actually start this thing. So I'm going to ask the panelists to take a minute or two and introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their work. Jeff, do you want to kick us off and tell us a little bit about what you're doing in LDR Group?
Okay, LDR is a vertically integrated contractor. We pretty much do everything ourselves. We do sub out land, earthworks, things like that, concrete, some of the larger things that we can't do ourselves. But we believe that we have the best, how should I say, ethic for getting this stuff done correctly. We are focusing now on strictly on Passive House renovations and new builds, and working with. Just recently got real hot on AAC. Want to do some projects on that with Dan Levy, and see what we can come up with that. Especially considering the cost of framing wood these days. It's just such an attractive material. I've got a long history in custom millwork, so my interiors tend to be high custom, even when they're not. it costs me money, but I tend to want to do the best stuff no matter what. My wife's the CFO, so she is always right on top of things. A lot of the work we do is open book, or what we call semi-open book. We have when I say semi-open book, we have a fixed number for overhead and profit, so we don't necessarily deluge our clients with details. But we do this for a reason. It gives clarity and a lot of real detail to the client, and we work our payment schedules the same way so that people understand when they're paying for something, they can actually look at it and see that it's done. Other than that, we're really excited to get into this. I've been building since I was a kid. Just got into Passive House this year. Realized that I was actually doing some of these things anyway, just because of my ethic in trying to get things done right. And got real excited about this. Got certified, and now we're moving ahead. We've got a couple of good projects on the books this summer.
Nice. Okay. Well, we'll certainly get into some of that as we go along here. Thanks, Jeff. Stephanie, how are you?
I'm doing great. Hey, Brian, how are you? How's everybody? not just talking to you, Brian.
So, Stephanie, tell us a little bit about what you do at North River Design Build.
Okay, North River Design Build is a new launch for our architectural practice, which has been a business for more than 10 years in the Hudson Valley. We've been designing passive house projects for that long, for about 10 years. And last year we launched as a contractor, so we could make our make an effort to fix some of the continuity issues that we were seeing in transitioning from design phase to construction phase, and also just try to find the efficiencies in the projects that we're really looking for to make passive house affordable. And we think that integrating design and construction is one way to do that. I have some great partners at North River Design Build, and we're actually we're growing, and we're facing a great demand right now. It's really kind of a stunning time in the Hudson Valley, and we have a lot to look forward to. Really didn't expect this 12 months ago, but there's an incredible interest in passive house and net zero design and construction in this area, and we're just really happy to meet so many people who are passionate about it.
Nice. Thanks, Stephanie. And how's it going out with the Gallatin house?
Great. We're going to be done in about 3 weeks, so we'll have some really great photographs to share with you soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
John Lorcher, how are you?
Hey, Brian. Nice to talk to you again. Hey, everyone.
Nice to talk with you. John, so you're principal consultant with Northeast Projects. Like principal is in like the principals or a principal?
The principal. This is my personal business, Northeast Project, for kind of my pet project for about 4 years. But it's just kind of one spoke on the hub of my involvement with Passive House, luckily for me. Yeah, so thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure coordinating with you guys between the Passive House Alliance and Chronogram for this publication. I think this is something that we've been really excited about doing for a while, is kind of tapping into the resources that you guys have and the reach that you have to help spread the word about Passive House a little bit longer. Before I get into myself, if I could just plug Passive House Alliance really quick, that would be great. There's a number of us on this call right now. James is the founding member of the Passive House Alliance, Hudson Valley. Stephanie's our vice president. I am on the board. I don't have a very special role at this point, although I am very passionate about our organization. I did put our link to our website in the chat, but I'll throw it in there again. And really, we're an organization that caters to architects, designers, builders, raters, and even a lot of homeowners. So some of the best conversation we have is when we could meet in person, we having all of those different kind of groups in the same room and exchanging ideas and perspectives was really enlightening. And a lot of our team, completely volunteer run, did a really wonderful job continuing that momentum onto the online platform. So hopefully we'll get back in person soon and you guys can join us. We'd love to have everyone, but we do plan on continuing the online format, kind of simultaneously broadcasting as well. So please look out for that. You can sign up for our newsletter at the very bottom of that website, and we won't harass you with too many emails, just about once a quarter or so. As far as me, again, my name is John Losher. I am an architect, passive house consultant, and educator. Like Brian said, my firm is Northeast Projects. I primarily architects and builders are my clients, although I do represent a few homeowners as well. I work as a consultant to existing design firms to help integrate passive house into their practice. I'm on the board of directors for the National Passive House Alliance that oversees the Passive House Alliance local chapters all throughout the country. And like I said, I'm pretty involved with our local Passive House Hudson Valley chapter. I also teach for FIAS, the Passive House Institute US. I've been teaching the CPHC course for about 4 years also. So as long as I've been consulting on my own. And I'm currently the co-director of the building science program at Rensselaer Polytechnic up in Troy, where we're trying to integrate Passive House as much as possible there. It's really exciting to share that with the next generation of architects.
Nice.
Yeah, sorry, that was a mouthful. I'll give it back to you, Brian.
That was great. Thank you. I'm interested to have the group chat a little bit about education, which kind of is a great segue for you in. Joe, how are you?
Hi, everyone.
There we go. I can hear you better now. How are you doing?
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm doing very well. Hi, everyone. Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about
it's really,
excuse me? Tell us about Cho Shield Studio.
Yes. Well, it's really great to be here with all of you. I'm really excited. And I'm a licensed architect and a certified Passive House designer, Kingston and Brooklyn based. And I think I join everyone here today in expressing how much we all love and believe in Passive House. And as a social and environmentally focused architect, I truly love how Passive House empowers all of us with the tools to provide everyone with comfortable and healthy homes and buildings, while at the same time delivering huge energy savings and resiliency. And so because of all these amazing benefits and realizing the importance of popularizing the building sustainability concepts in order for all of us to urgently mitigate climate change, we've actually been engaging in a very multidisciplinary approach through our architectural practice, as well as policy support and through education. So we basically applied Passive House principles to all of our projects, from residential retrofits, new buildings, master plans for mixed income communities, and even to farming and agricultural spaces. And in the area of policy support, I've actually served as an industry expert advisor for the recent revision of the 2020 New York City Energy Conservation Code that supports these citywide building policies that are aimed at addressing climate change. And I've also been training industry professionals, owners, developers in these latest updates, as well as training in the Passive House concepts. And last, in education, with the belief that teaching students about Passive House principles is truly one of the best ways to lay the groundwork for future change. We've been partnering with schools from grade levels to high schools and soon to college to teach Passive House concepts in a really fun, collaborative and creative ways, exploring these ideas from drawings, music, dance, model making, and just any other way that they would find it most meaningful and fun for them to learn and remember for the rest of their lives. So through this multidisciplinary approach that we take, our goal truly is to spread the knowledge so that everyone knows exactly what Passive House means, just the way that we all understand recycling. And so therefore, really wanting to advocate for really a true climate positive future that is also socially equitable, and so that we can all really enjoy the places where we live, where we work, and just come together as a community.
Nice. Yeah, thanks. And that's great. And I think the education piece will come back around to, because I think that's really an important piece. Last but certainly not least, James Hartford, how are you?
Well, thanks, Brian. It's really great to see everyone here. It's a really exciting thing to see a huge turnout. I think there were 280 people registered for this earlier, hopefully even more joined on. When I formed the Passive House Alliance, I had to pull a few people together, and we had 3 certified people, which was the minimum amount that was required to actually launch a chapter. And it's really edifying to see how much we've grown. We, the last time I checked, it was over 300 people on our mailing list. There might be more, John, I'm sure. It started off where we had to educate our clients and teach people the benefits of Passive House. And the very first one that we did, I explained it to the client, and she said, "Well, why would I do it any other way?" And it's been sort of like taking the training wheels off since then. Now people seek us out. I would say 100% of our projects are Passive House, except for the few things that don't require it, like a garage, things like that. But, so we're doing multifamily Passive Houses now as far as Cooperstown. We've got we just completed a 10,000 square foot cidery production and event space in Calhoun, New York. And my own building right here is a renovation of a 1840s blacksmith shop as a Passive House. And we're source net zero. So we actually offset the energy losses all the way back to the power plants. It's really exciting to actually, to walk the walk. And it's great to see a lot of people joining us. And now this is my 10th year of being involved in Passive House. And it's really great to have that 10-year anniversary and, just so much demand and all of it coming for Passive House and not having to sell it to anyone anymore. There's a lot of great support coming along where we've got NYSERDA and, investment from the public, code catching up towards Passive House. But, this is a community that's launched. We know how to do this stuff. We know how to do better houses that are better for the environment and better for the people who inhabit them, and better for the people who are building them. So, doing really high performance buildings without spray foam and toxic and dangerous materials is really an important step that we've all taken. And one more point on just our community in the Hudson Valley. We are the largest in the Northeast and extremely active. I mean, really, my engagement has gone from Toronto to Connecticut to New Jersey in terms of those early days of Passive House, where I was basically on the road for, representing it to a lot of different communities. But it's a community of sharing, and so it's not normal for architects to share ideas, to share resources, to share your favorite contractors, and to support each other. But this is a sharing community that does that. Yes, there are times when, Stephanie and I might, be bidding on the same project, but that's just life, right? But our real competition are the people who are not in this room, so the getting to break into the larger building community has been our goal, not just for our business plans. This is really about making the impact that we need as a society.
Thanks, James. And I, to the point of kind of getting out in front of people a bit, we seem to be at an inflection point in a way. Here in the Hudson Valley, right, we're experiencing this great migration, and there's very little stock of housing, and so homes need to be built. And so this seems like such a tremendous opportunity to change the kind of the way, if we can get in front of people to offer them a different idea about what, because as I said, I didn't even understand what Passive House was a year ago. And so now, I'm a total convert. So to that point, I assume that many people on this call understand what Passive House is. But for those who don't, I'm going to ask, and I'm going to throw this out to the panel, what's the elevator pitch on Passive House that you give? Like, why? Why would you go Passive House other than anything else? So anybody on the panel want to jump in, please do.
I'll be happy to, since I'm one of the newest here. Comfort, resiliency, the savings are great, and value and worth and all that stuff. But really, what I'm finding with the clients that I speak to, the ones that are getting excited about this, they're really happy about the resiliency and about the low maintenance, because most people today don't have the mechanical abilities that the 20s and 30-year-olds had when I was that age. And so they really want something that's worry-free, maintenance-free. You know, they also want to save the planet, and I think that's a bigger and bigger part of it. You know, most people pitch this as you know, it's cheaper, it's this, it's that. I don't see it. It's not what I feel people are coming down as a secondary, more as a primary. But primary is comfort and resiliency, as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll jump in.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm thinking about this, you know, from an architectural standpoint as a designer, and the Passive House, the standard requires building design to respond to its local environment and to the conditions of solar gain and potential for shade in a way that's actually very antique in terms of like how buildings used to be built and how, in my opinion, how they should be built. And now we're coming back to that by a standard that is rigorous in its science and, you know, involves a lot of technical inputs, and, you know, you use tapes that are, you know, highly, you know, precise about their function and use for air sealing. So you have this sort of technical part of it, but what you're really trying to do is make a house that responds to the conditions that are comfortable and actually make sense for living. So you have windows facing south for solar gains, and it's comfortable in the wintertime, and you know you can enjoy your interior spaces more, and you're shaded from the sun, and the rooms and circulation that don't need to be exposed to those conditions of solar gain are at the back of the house. And it just makes for, and just as an example, you know, that's not the entirety of the design standard, but that just makes for a house that feels good and makes sense. And then you can just like, you're not kind of fighting it. You don't have, you don't feel like the architecture is, you know, forcing a layout or an experiential situation that's uncomfortable. So it's almost in the bones of it. And it's really interesting to see how people respond to that and feel that that's actually so.
Yeah, if I could play off of what Stephanie's saying here, this kind of this connection to the landscape here, I think, is culturally something that we see in the Hudson Valley. And now, I mean, if anyone has their ear to the ground, you see all the people that are moving up into the Hudson Valley within the past year. And obviously, a big part of that is our proximity to New York City. But still the ability to have like the great outdoors, right? So there's kind of this concept of ecophilia that is kind of embedded within the residential scale that we have here in Hudson Valley architecture. And about once or twice a year, I get a call from someone who's living in a passive solar house. So if anyone remembers passive solar, this is kind of a movement that started in the 70s based on the oil embargo. So this was the first time we couldn't afford some gas prices, and that's where it kind of got building scientists start to think about how we can use natural resources instead. So those calls that I get, and I'm sure James gets them, I'm sure Stephanie gets them. If you go to visit those, we have mold, we have radon leaking into the home. There's just like so many failures from the passive solar movement, and I really see I see the draw into that type of home where you're really, everything is kind of interacting. The lines of the actual building envelope are a little bit blurry between, you know, where the environment starts and the interior environment and the exterior environment start to mix. So what I'm trying to say is that I think Passive House is the solution to that, because we finally got to a point where we have good building science that's easily accessible to architects. And the Passive House Institute US has done an amazing job kind of broadcasting this in a most cost-effective way. So we have ways to still have that kind of ecophilia effect that like passive solar was trying to achieve so many years ago. But now we have a way to do it with the resiliency that Jeff is explaining, you know, previously.
Just to, you know, what everyone, Jeff and Stephanie and John, what you're all saying is just also perfect. And, you know, just to add to that, Passive House really, it's so based on common sense in so many ways. And just the term passive, we all know there's 5 principles, air sealing, insulation, high performance windows and doors, thermal bridge free construction, and ventilation energy recovery. And out of the 5 principles, 4 of them in terms of the function of a building doesn't require energy. Embodied carbon energy is another story, but just in terms of the operation of buildings. So it's just such as Stephanie said, in a way, it's kind of like going back to the Little House on the Prairie days, where how would you build these structures that are just so economical in so many ways? And then, balanced with the modern technology of certain smart materials, intelligent materials that really kind of make Passive House today's response to our current environmental conditions of climate change, that is really responding well actively as it can and most successfully, that really meet the precipice of where we need to go in terms of building technology to really continue providing, everyone with healthy, habitable environments. Just like the fact that we had ancient Roman times, of these fat stone walls with tiny windows, and that was the response of those times. And then we had the Industrial Revolution, with cast iron and glass that expanded all this new structural system. Then that went to curtain walls of modern age, where facades were no longer structurally load-bearing. And today, it's really Passive House. And once it becomes more and more popularized, as it is already starting to happen, it'll become the industry standard and become part of that evolution of building technology, and that this will become the new and the new norm of building, so that we can continue to deal with climate change while still everyone having a great home.
Nice. Thank you. So let me just put a question in the chat, which was along the lines of something I was thinking about retrofitting. And so, if I'm thinking about, like, let's say I want to retrofit my home, Passive House wise, where do I start off? How do I get that going? James, do you want to jump in on that one?
Sure. Probably 50% of our work is retrofits, and in the Hudson Valley, the predominant building type is wood structure, right? So, like, you can see the wood timber of this building, and so it works really well with wood. It's an easier material to work with compared to masonry. Incho has done some projects in Manhattan, I believe, or in Brooklyn. I'm not too sure, but there's a lot of masonry work going on there. Some happening, say, in Newburgh. But masonry has its own kind of sets of challenges, and wood has its own too. But it's completely feasible to take existing housing stock, building stock, and retrofit it to this Passive House level, and save all this, both the history, but also the embodied carbon that is represented in the framing. So, we can take these older structures and bring them really right up to the latest cutting edge technology. And I just want to say, kind of to talk about the aspects of Passive House in terms of, its construction. I mean, there's so much work put up front, to kind of follow what Stephanie was saying about, designing the way we should as architects, that we're loading up the front end of the work. And it's sort of like lazy computing. The term makes it sound like, people are just kind of lounging around, but really you're working really hard so that the user has to work much less. So it takes a lot less input and a lot less maintenance actually in a properly designed, properly built Passive House.
Are there better, just on the retrofit again, are there better candidates for retrofits as far as houses go, or buildings than other? Jeff, you're kind of nodding. What makes a good candidate for a retrofit?
Simple form factor, something that's not half buried underground, something that hasn't been bastardized, pardon the French, before. There are a lot of things that go into making a decision on whether you can retrofit a Passive House. What I recommend to everybody, and I think this was in the pullout section there as well, was that before you buy or before you find a home that you want to buy, you consult with a Passive House engineer, Passive House designer beforehand, so that you can find out, because you may look. I'm retrofitting a house right now. We're not able to bring it to Passive House standards, but it's an old 1980s passive solar house, and we're doing as much as we can to make it energy efficient and to bring it into line. But there's just so much we can do because it's just not designed correctly. So, before you buy, consult, and if you have something that you want to do, get your consultant to take a look at it and see if you can do it. She, a lot more she's than he's these days.
And to the point of just general retrofitting, that as Stephanie mentioned, there are all these different approaches and strategies that we take, and they all work in concert with each other. So when you think about retrofitting, to kind of have this kind of almost like a master plan idea first, to understand how the parts work together. So for example, let's say, we say, oh, it's so great to air seal our home, because that's one of the principles of passive house. But as we all know, if we air seal too much without adding ventilation system, well, we all know what that happens. We have the sick building syndrome of all suffocating, and this is where mold and condensation happens. So I think to what Jeff said about making sure that there is a passive house consultant on board and kind of helping homeowners guide them into an overall strategy that then can be implemented strategically, even in different phases. So it doesn't all have to be done once, which I'm sure, James, you've done a lot of these, but that at least there's a master cohesive plan into which each of these phase puzzle pieces can happen. And this way, all the systems are coordinated and they're not in conflict with each other.
Yeah, if I could add, so I guess tying in the question about embodied carbon as well. If we look at our climate change goals, and we always kind of see this milestone of 2030, right? That's a year that really pops up a lot for our climate change goals. And the AIA has put out a study under the Architecture 2030 plan. And within that study, they estimate about an equal amount of new construction and retrofit work will occur by 2030. So if we look at that number of retrofits that occurs by 2030, if we don't start to bring those up to the same standards that we're creating our new construction with, then we have a real problem for ourselves there. And I know IN has a really wonderful retrofit project, as does, a lot of other professionals here. But if you look at some of those retrofits, especially when we're talking about concrete or masonry buildings, there is an incredible savings in embodied carbon by retrofitting a project like that, especially when you compare it to building a new building of the same typology. So even though there is some challenge in designing a retrofit to the passive house standard, it's not as simple because you're starting with an existing kind of canvas. And I always like to say it's kind of like fitting a square peg into a round hole. It's just not really compatible based on how we used to build. So, with that in mind, I think, there should be more pressure on retrofitting to the passive house standard. And I think that extra bit of work for coordination, design work, potential headaches in the field, at least from a carbon perspective, has a really big payoff.
John, I'd like to add something on that. My attitude with that is a little bit proletariat. A lot of people don't want to renovate the passive house. I think it's beholden on the industry and contractors in particular to bring every aspect of passive house renovation to a renovation project, whether it's going to be certified or not. And I think that's something that, you really have to get the contractors on board for, because there are a lot of projects that are going to be renovated between now and then that are not going to be renovated passive house, but can be incorporating a lot of things like intelligent membranes and better windows and doors and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and Ed said this as well. Planning, we can phase the renovations of a project, but the really important thing is planning it properly. One of the biggest frustrations when we have a new client who comes along and says, I have this house, I've already replaced the windows and I upgraded the boiler, but I want to do passive house. And it's like, that's all, that's too bad, because you just, just completely stranded those assets right there, because they're not going to want to replace new windows that they paid too much money for. Even though those are probably some of the most important things, and that boiler, we don't want that boiler. That boiler's going out. So it's really important that people plan, and if you're thinking about it, speak to someone early. Don't start and then hope you can catch up.
I can hear the like a background of frustration there about coming in the middle of projects that people have already started and being like, oh dear, well, why didn't you call me earlier? Yeah. Yep. I feel that. So we're going to take a slight break from the panel discussion and go to a couple of our sponsors to give them a moment here. So please stay with us. We've got loads of more questions in the chat. Please put your questions up in there. First, I want to ask Talo Tapani from Talo Architect to speak to us. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you. For really lovely conversation.
So please give us a little sense of what you're up to.
Well, since I'm 70, my entire, quote, green started at 1973 because I had to fly back to Finland from the UK because of the oil embargo. And when I studied architecture following spring, quitting the Stones as a sound engineer, the professor said on the first minute, we are starting green. We're doing metric, which was new in the UK, and we're doing green. And they taught us every project we had was the lighting calculation, energy calculation, and it became every project, like, it didn't matter what we did, we did it. And I came to the United States 3 years later, and they said, oh, forget it. And it took me until 1994, after I'd done huge big projects with famous architects and like Times Square 5 times over and all that. I found this glass that was developed by MIT 1973, which was this south wall windows. And all of a sudden, I could make a renovation as good as anything. And then later it was called passive, but it was the glass that allowed me to even address the issue. And all the projects that I've done since and then and now, the whole principle is that even if it's not passive, if there's a wood burning fireplace in the basement, I can keep the house 72 degrees at any weather. So even if they don't do any technical stuff, that is the principle. And so to move that from that one into quote passive and in every possible way, it's just a matter of a few nuances in between that come to play, because you have to choose the contractor, you have to be more careful about this and that. But 10 years ago, when my late wife passed away from cancer, we lost power for 2 weeks. It was 10-degree weather, and she did not want to go to the hospital in the last days. And I kept the house 72 degrees. And it was probably the icing on the cake for all that learning that I did over the years and did my own house. And so it's that kind of a little things in the right moment, you really get the power. And then when we lost the power at Sandy with all that weather, with my new wife, we didn't have a problem. So
amazing. And so we're going to put your website in the chat so people can check out your work, Talo.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us. Richard Pedranti, how are you?
Hey, Brian. I'm doing great. Hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Rich Pedranti. My firm is RPA, and we're a boutique architecture practice based in northeastern Pennsylvania. We have over 10 years experience engineering and building passive house and net zero projects all over the mid-Atlantic region. We're certified by both the Passive House Institute and Passive House International, and we've designed and constructed multiple passive house projects. I think probably most of the architects on the conference today, it doesn't matter what we're doing, we're including the passive house principles in all of our projects. We also include prefabrication in many of our projects, which allows us to deliver our projects faster and with a lot less waste. I've not met anyone that after hearing about passive house says, well, that's a bad idea. The single most popular question we get is, does passive house cost more? And there's always no. We prove that passive house doesn't have to cost more than traditional construction on our first projects. The Scranton Passive House, Scranton, Pennsylvania, which was named Green Building Magazine 2017 Passive House of the Year, and our Souder Passive House project, just to the northwest of Philadelphia, both certified by the Passive House Institute, were very comparable to traditional construction. The Passive House in Scranton cost about $165 a square foot. That was in 2014-15. And this project was actually a little bit less because the owner self-performed a bit of the construction. So what we learned in those early projects was, probably like a lot of the other architects on the call today, that it's not about specifying affordable materials, but it's about the big impact of the early design decisions. So, we're not designing buildings and then applying passive house requirements. We have to integrate our passive house approach design process. So when we cost optimize passive house design, it's really the building science that's driving all those early design decisions. Things like the orientation, the form, the geometry, the organization of the interior, layout of the mechanical systems. And when you let the science drive these efficiencies, you're forced to create a simple and cost-effective detailing in the building envelope. This found that contributes to how do you make passive house cost-effective. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of benefits to certification. Quality control, quality assurance, through the whole design, engineering, and construction process. But a lot of our clients choose not to certify. And again, we apply the same approach and the same principles. And it's because, our clients want more complex geometry, or they want walls of glass, or they want both. We still use the passive house approach. And this allows us to maintain same levels of health and comfort, but maybe with a very small increase in energy consumption.
Nice. Thank you, Richard. I think the affordability question is a real good one, and one that I have for the group. I've spoken, I think, to most of the panel about this over the course of the past few months about, is passive house as affordable as contemporary construction for, residential homes, right? So there, obviously, if we're talking about a multifamily, if we're talking about larger buildings, it's different than talking about, a residential home. So, Richard, you were saying that it can be done. The argument that I heard was, it might be a little more expensive up front, but it pays dividends off over time. So panelists, care to weigh in on that?
Yes, actually, it really can be comparable to contemporary non-passive house construction, and it all depends on what we do with it. There's, for example, in one of our projects that was a two-family home, but it was still a relatively small square footage, no more than 5,000 square feet. It started out as a non-passive house project, but we were still using materials of high quality construction. And when we switched to doing passive house, it turned out that it wasn't any more expensive. It was literally about, strategically thinking systems where we ended up using more materials of insulation, for example. We ended up reducing in our mechanical equipment and sizing. We eliminated radiators altogether. So all that plumbing work and radiator equipment for heating just, left the picture and instead got replaced with more insulation. So, and then there's also the whole sensible design of the building. As I think, someone also rightly mentioned, just sensible designs, that aren't with non-crazy intricate geometries could also help, and as well as what kind of finishes one chooses. So there's so many factors that determine the cost. And so when you put all these different elements together, you really can have something that can be cost comparable to to non-passive house construction. Or sometimes it could be more. So it really depends on many factors, but it's definitely doable to cost parity.
Our focus at North River Design Build is it's on affordability, and so how we're pushing into that is by offering the simplest possible design concept to our clients, just as a starting point, saying, here's what we think will get you the most house, certified passive house for your budget, and here are the decisions that have been made to get there. And that doesn't work for everybody because people want to customize a design and have other ideas about the complexity of the building volume. But by offering a simple rectangular, two-story volume, it's compact. The envelope detailing is standardized for our practice from one project to another. We sort of have it figured out for how we want to build, and then we are able to just produce. We produce designs efficiently as a result of this sort of repetitive approach to our services, and then by building similarly with each project, then we don't have to develop new details. We don't have to educate our set of subcontractors to a new type of construction or technical component of the project. So we're really aiming to get to the sort of sweet spot of how can we get you a home that is going to be a passive house. I guess to Incho's point, we haven't necessarily figured it out. Every project is different and has their own particular cost drivers, but we're trying to push that envelope as hard as we can. And I think based on the receptive clients that we have to the budgets that we offer, I think that we're putting something out there that makes sense to them, at least in our region. So it's always a work in progress, though.
Yeah, I think the most expensive passive house project is going to be one that was designed not as a passive house from the beginning. And then somewhere halfway through the middle, they learned about passive house and decided they wanted to do that. And I think anyone that we talk to in the passive house community is going to say their first project is the most expensive. So that being said, and I'm going to say this with a grain of salt, because I do think that we need to continue making passive house mainstream. Every architect should really know how to do this, and at the very least, just be more aware of how much energy their buildings are using. Applying passive house principles. But that being said, working with a professional, especially a design architect that is familiar with passive house principles from the very beginning, is going to end up translating into cost savings in the long run. I mean, there's things just with initial schematic design, the form of the building, the complexity of the building, that actually do end up saving you energy and cost at the very end. So that would be my recommendation is, if passive house is a goal, really integrate that as quickly as possible and find someone who's done it before, so you can capitalize on all the mistakes they've made on previous projects.
Right. John, that was a kind of a breakthrough I had about understanding passive house, was that it wasn't a set of stackable technologies the house itself is a piece of technology that is all interrelated. And so like if you're coming into like something that's half built, I can see why that's a problem. And so that was, I think, something that was essential for me to understand Passive House as a piece of technology in and of itself. Somebody had asked a question, which is a practical one, but I think is a very useful one, about how prevalent is access to contractors who are capable of working in and fixing issues in a passive house. And I can feel in the background here someone saying, well, I want to do Passive House, but am I going to be able to get someone who is, you know, licensed to build it? And if something goes wrong, can I get them out to fix it?
So there is no particular, you know, license to build as a passive house builder. There is a certification. There's a, you know, FIAS, the Passive House Institute US, has a certified builder program. Passive House International has a Passive House tradesperson certification. But those are credentials that are good to have. But we've actually had some of the best results with contractors that weren't trained in it. They were just trained in good construction, and they can follow directions. What we find to be the biggest frustration is working with a conventional builder who then tries to flip the script and you know, then go conventional and, you know, kind of try to pull the rug out from underneath architect and consultant because they think they can get the client's ear. So, you know, there's always a bit of salesmanship there that we need to be very careful of. But, you know, in the 10 years that I've been doing it, we went from really about one builder around who was a certified Passive House builder to quite a few. And part of it is, you know, the active pursuit of it by our organization, Passive House Alliance Hudson Valley, in bringing training to the Hudson Valley, but also directly working with our building crews so that they're doing the right thing. And some have kind of splintered off to make, you know, it's sort of like, you know, kind of or gone forth and prospered. And then Stephanie and Richard both are good examples of getting into the construction aspects of it too. So it's not a challenge anymore to find qualified builders. But don't expect a conventional builder to automatically get it. And that's usually where people get burnt.
It really is about whether, not so much that they are certified passive house builders, but rather that they're just even open to the idea of doing proper construction, you know, something that really is of quality, such as, you know, Jeff, you mentioned that you were doing passive house related type of construction even before you realized it was passive house. And there are many contractors, not many, but there's definitely enough to be there, whether they're certified or not. And then of course, then there are the consultants who can also help guide that process, working with the contractors, such as, you know, Stephanie and James and John and so many other really talented architects and designers in the Hudson Valley area. So there's definitely, it feels like we're really reaching a critical mass that just, you know, I think by homeowners asking the right questions to the contractors as well as, you know, designers saying, are you open to doing what's called passive house, and really see their attitude about it. I think that's the first and foremost step to getting a good contractor.
Mm-hmm. Well said. This is just a very pragmatic question that we can dispense with quickly. Someone asked, what type of testing of the building is required to certify as passive house? Panel?
One of the testing is the blower door test. So it's an air leakage test, and it has to reach a certain minimum requirements. So either 1 air changes per hour or 0.6 air changes per hour, depending on a certain standard that you're trying to meet. And then the other ones are not tests, but rather just commissioning reports, as well as inspections, documentations that needs to be put in and well recorded and submitted. So between documentations, air leakage testing, and commissioning reports, those are the 3 factors that go into getting a building certified.
And if I'm building passive, sorry, John, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, just so the Passive House Institute US has a really robust quality assurance, quality control program, actually. So part of the process, in addition with dealing with the design team, is we have a HERS rater essentially come in, and they're the ones who do the blower door testing. So they're registered so that you can submit the proper paperwork to NYSERDA for incentives, and then you can make sure that you're getting kind of paid for some of the energy upgrades that you're doing through New York State.
So would that be the reason to get certified? So, I've hired one of you guys, to build me this beautiful passive house I have now, right? And you're like, okay, here's your house. You can get it certified or not. And I'm like, well, why should I get it certified? Why do I want to spend more money to get it certified now? Where does that get me?
That's a great question. And the fact is that it's your best assurance that the house is performing the way it was designed and intended. It's very, very common that we get that question. Well, why? I'm not going to sell my house, whatever. But the fact is that you really know that you've got the blower door test results that we've designed it to, that our energy modeling is accurate, and that our assumptions are sound, because there's a lot of quality control, quality assurance. So my design details, my energy model go off to FIAS, they review it, they come back with comments, and we have to roll up our sleeves again and keep on working hard. So so we work really hard at doing that, and the end result is that you really know with a much higher certainty that you're going to get what you set out to do.
It's the same reason why you have a third-party home inspector when you buy a house. You don't want the design team to be the one verifying that everything's built the way that it should be. It's good to have an extra eye on it.
Right. And I just want to add one more, is that there is a perception that the passive house adds, that it's an expense that is, just unwarranted. I don't want to knock LEED. It's where I started off in terms of energy, and let's say sustainability, kind of guidelines. But LEED is an expensive proposition, especially in the residential house sphere. And it doesn't deliver the same kind of energy performance that passive house does. So there is that's sort of kind of muddied the waters for passive house. The fees are very, very small and absolutely earned in terms of certification.
And so this question came up a couple times in the chat about, just to speak to LEED and net zero. It came up like, what's the difference between LEED, net zero, and passive house? How do you describe that to folks who come to you with those types of questions?
Net zero is not a certified standard, to my awareness at least. It's a sort of gray area. It's a term. It means something. It means that the building, by virtue of renewables, usually solar panels, produces as much energy on an annual basis as the energy that it requires to function over that same year. So net zero ready design is a design that gets you up to that point where it's as insulated, as energy efficient, airtight construction, as it can be, poised to install those solar panels either on the roof or on the property to actually bring it to net zero. But there's no certification body that's going to say that that's so. There are some, I think, Department of Energy standards that have one metric perhaps, and there may be a few other competing standards. I think there's a little more variability there. Now that I'm thinking about it, but LEED obviously is a certification standard. It has a very clear set of requirements and documentation needs and submissions in order to get that certification. Passive house is a similar kind of standard, but passive house focuses, if you compare it to LEED, and I think that was one of the questions, passive house focuses on the envelope of the building, the energy efficiency of the building. It is really it's kind of taking a laser focus on what does this building need for energy? How can we reduce that to the maximum possible extent within reason financially, and how do we set certain parameters in order to give guidance? Because you could say, I want an energy efficient building, and then where are you going with that? How energy efficient do you want it to be? And so passive house gives you a target, and it's one that's achievable, and it focuses on the those parameters that Insho was describing, the 5 fundamentals of passive house construction. LEED is more broad-based. It addresses issues of sustainable sites and access to public transportation, and these are all really great qualities of architecture and social design considerations, but it tends to dilute the energy efficiency part of it. And so for me as a practitioner, I've done both, as James did. I started out as a LEED certified, LEED accredited professional, and passive house just seemed more focused on the thing itself, more accessible and appropriate to residential construction, which is where I am.
And then ultimately, that they will all come together and work in concert, with LEED and passive house, because at the moment, passive house, it doesn't deal with the notions of embodied carbon necessarily, whereas LEED may do more of that in terms of traveling and the travel radius, the production of materials, all those aspects too. So really, at the end, we'd like for all those kind of systems to work together. And then we will have a perfect environmental construction culture.
Nice. Here's an interesting question. Is there an optimum size passive house dwelling that represents a potential standard for most people's real world living conditions? I think I know the answer to this, but let me know. Optimal size, anybody? Panel?
Okay, all that radio silence, I'm gonna jump in. There's definitely truth to an adage in the passive house community about the small building penalty. And that's something that VS has been working hard to address. But smaller buildings are more challenging just simply because the enclosed volume relative to the exposure, the skin surface of that ratio is you're containing a smaller amount of space for just an incrementally smaller amount of surface area. So the heat loss or heat gains through that skin becomes kind of more pronounced in a smaller building. So the best size, the optimum size for a passive house is a multifamily building. These little buildings that we're doing, these are the hard ones. These are the ones that we have to work much harder at. But to scale it up to a multifamily, an urban block, that's really easy. And it's the sort of thing that that's where the sweet spot is. And it's actually the most sustainable. But it's, probably not most of our audience here.
And to what James said, it's really the surface over volume ratio, right? So because of that formula, surface over volume, you have this issue that's the smaller the structure, the harder it is to create this energy efficiency via passive house. Having said that, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. So all it just means is that the smaller the volume of a building structure is, the greater that we may have to put into factors of more insulation, those are the elements. So these are all, so to say that, we can do passive house in all different sizes and scales. And in terms of the ideal square footage, that probably pertains more to, the needs of the occupants and what they, need for their lifestyle, as well as then dealing with the overall carbon footprint. And that's a whole nother topic.
To try to actually answer the question, not that those two inputs weren't awesome, but like the question of how big a house, if our tiny data set from North River's practice is relevant, it's families, it's couples with, planning to have children, or they might someday, wanting to have some flexibility in terms of bedroom count, 3 to 4 bedrooms. So, we're finding floor plans, that work with multifunctional kind of living spaces at minimum 1,800 square feet. But that's kind of an architectural question, not a passive house question. But 1,800 square feet on 2 stories, as it can be a compact volume, it can be really well suited to passive house. And then, you can just go up from there depending on what your needs are for the house.
Nice. Okay. We are almost out of time, but I have one more question for the panel here, and this came in from somebody ahead of our event today. They said, as a relatively new building concept, what so far as history shown us in terms of Passive House? Have there been unforeseen challenges in any aspects of it that have been brought to light that are iterating over time? Like what have we learned thus far from the launch of the Passive House movement?
Yeah, I think this ties into the question that was just going on in the chat. You know, we model things as designers. We simulate them to the best of our knowledge of how it will perform in the future. So obviously there's just inherently inaccuracies within that, right? Like the kind of the term that we teach in the Passive House consultant course is garbage in, garbage out. Like if you don't have good information to start that simulation, you know, it might not be a great representation of what the future consumption is. Yeah, I think there's over the past couple of years, we've seen a lot more progress in monitoring. So in actually, you know, verifying the performance over a period of time. But the challenge that we have right now is that, let's say, you know, some of the most, you know, the largest projects that we're dealing with have been monitoring for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. That's actually still not a very long period of time to be monitoring. So what we really need is more time to continue to gather data for more projects. And then it will be able to kind of refine more precisely as time goes by. And again, you know, this is exactly what the Passive House Institute US does. Every 3 years, they take a look at their standards and then they revise that. So if you tried to certify Passive House in 2012, it was actually quite difficult. And you probably designed that house with like much higher insulation levels than you would now. And FIAS just released the 2021 standards, which is 3 rounds of iteration. They have a prescriptive path now, which help eliminate energy modeling altogether, which can be a huge cost savings for the client. And also it's updating for, you know, kind of current like social political aspects too. So, you know, where are we going with energy and electrification in the way that we heat and cool our buildings? So that is specifically being addressed and reassessed every few years.
I think, you know, for our climate, you know, it's really important to note that, you know, Passive House, it's a concept that was started in Canada and, you know, Minnesota and you know, the 70s. But it really kind of hit fertile ground in Germany in the early 90s. And so the first certified Passive House, you know, like where this term really happened is actually in Darmstadt in Germany, where I was in school at that time, which is pretty exciting. But the metrics of it are really were in the early days were based on that climate, which is very different from our climate. We think of it as being similar, but it's not. And so it's a challenge that that we've been kind of preparing for Central Europe's very mild weather, where heating is a demand, but it's not as hard as our winters, and cooling is, you know, increasingly a demand with climate change. But it was not a problem back in the 90s. So most houses didn't even incorporate cooling then. So so we've learned that in some ways we were working too hard here in North America, which also made things more expensive. But and so, you know, it's been kind of a readjust, recalibrate, and we're largely talking about FIAS, but also PHI has been also recalibrating too. And I also just want to just throw it out there that the Passive House Alliance Hudson Valley is non-denominational. We're aligned with FIAS, but we welcome practitioners that are doing Passive House, you know, under all flags. So just so you know.
Thanks. No sectarian violence among Passive House.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a big time.
So our time is up. I really want to thank everybody for joining us here today. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, sponsors. I'm excited about 2022's Passive House Guide and working on that with you folks, and also, you know, on a continual basis to proselytize about this wonderful building technology. And I certainly would say, you know, everyone who is on the call will get an email once the video is up with all the links associated in the chat here. So we'll send that back out to everybody within the week. And I look forward to more talks about the possibilities of Passive House. And I hope everybody has a lovely evening.
Brian, can I just jump in really quickly?
Yeah, please.
Passive House Theus is having its annual conference in the Hudson Valley in October. So it's coming here, it's coming home, and we can open up a lot of buildings, houses, businesses for tours and things like that. And so it's a huge opportunity for education and sharing.
Well, James, let's connect on that, and I can send out that information when we send out the email, because that would be great. And certainly we will connect everybody in that email with the Passive House Alliance Hudson Valley chapter, because obviously there were loads of questions that did not get answered. And so I know that those people can, like, they were very specific technical questions. And, you know, you guys, you know, everybody who is on the panel today is ready to answer those questions. Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us, and go out and see the sun if it's still out there.
Thank you.
Bye.